Hello, welcome back to Ycft. We are back talking about some Hammer today, and no, it is not Curse of the Werewolf. I always keep saying that's the one we're gonna do next, and it never ends up being it.
Yeah, we lie.
We lie about that one, but we are doing a classic from 1971, directed by Roy Ward Baker, who we've talked about several times on this channel. Now we are doing Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, starring Ralph Bates and
Martine Beswick
as, well, Dr. Jekyll and Mrs. Hyde.
Yes.
You introduced this one to me probably about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, you always spoke very, very highly of this one. I just saw the DVD once when I was in HMV and decided, I'm just going to get it.
Uh-huh.
And I loved it. I think we watched it around the time with the latest Dr. Jekyll movie that came out that Hammer
Quite
did with
possibly.
Eddie Izzard. So I think you wanted to show me
Yeah.
that one in the lead up to it. And I just really liked it, I think. Considering it's in an era where Hammer weren't doing particularly great, like the 70s.
Yeah.
It's such a high quality. The story's really good. The production quality is really good. The acting's great. I was like, oh, this is just very, very good. And see, we like Roy Ward Baker. I mean, we have to forgive him for Seven Golden Vampires.
I can. You know, every director's got a rotten apple in there somewhere.
Yeah,
For the most
but
part.
he directed Scars of Dracula, which is one of my favourite Dracula films. He directed Quatermass and the Pit, which we've previously spoken. In fact, we spoke about both of those. I really like both of those films. He worked a lot with Hammer,
Yes,
and he's just
he did.
a good director.
Yes.
Ralph Bates was kind of like... Carreras described Ralph Bates as essentially like the upcoming star, and described the likes of Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing as getting a bit long in the tooth, so I think they kind of wanted Ralph Bates to take over.
Yeah.
Tragically, he passed away at quite a fairly young age.
I think he was in his 50s. He died in 1991. He died of pancreatic cancer,
Yeah.
which is very sad. But I love Ralph Bates.
And which Dracula is it that he's in?
He's in Taste the Blood of Dracula. He plays Lord Courtly.
Yes.
If you recall.
Yes. He was good.
And he was very good. He was criminally underused. He should have been the main big bad of the movie. But anyway, Ralph was on a roll.
Yeah, because he was in The Vampire Lovers, didn't he?
Well, he did Taste the Blood of Dracula in 1970. Then that same year, he does Horror of Frankenstein.
Where he plays
Which-
Baron Frankenstein.
I love that film a lot. Then he did Lust for a Vampire in 1971, and it's in Lust for a Vampire that he replaced Peter Cushing.
Yeah.
And then he does this.
Christopher Lee didn't want Peter Cushing to go do Seven Golden Vampires, thinks it was beneath him. But his wife recently passed away, he wanted to go. And he said Ralph is willing to step in and do this for you. You do not have to do this.
Yeah.
So he was just on an absolute roll.
And he had a lot of fun, Ralph, as well. He said he really enjoyed working with Hammer.
Yeah, and a bit of a twist on the typical Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde story,
Yes.
in that when Dr. Jekyll takes the formula, he turns into a woman,
Yes, he does.
Mrs. Hyde. And in other twists, it also brings in elements of Jack the Ripper
Yes.
and Burke and Hare.
It's the most ultimate Gothic Victorian story that they could have woven, honestly.
It's interesting bringing those real-world elements into it
Yes.
as well. So, as part of his experiments, he kills people because he needs parts, hormones. And when he can't kill them himself, he will get Burke and Hare to steal bodies for him. And I think that is such an interesting story. And it works so seamlessly.
It does.
It doesn't have any right to be that good.
It's very well done how they interweave these three very different, as you say, like for the most part, true stories together into the one narrative. And interestingly, this is Jack the Ripper and Jekyll and Hyde are both properties, stories that Hammer would revisit at different times.
I think they did
As
two
well.
Jekyll movies this year.
Yeah.
Like
true.
in 71.
True.
Probably
Yeah.
just to reuse the same sets they made.
Yes.
So it starts off with Jekyll's trying to create vaccines.
Antivirus. The universal panacea. One virus to combat perhaps 20 diseases.
He's trying to cure
Yes.
disease. He's trying to do good work.
Scientific work.
Good scientific work. But it's brought to his attention that he probably won't live long enough to see the fruits of his work. Because the amount of work that's going to need to do something like that. Like, so we're still working on creating vaccines today.
Yeah, true.
It's an ever evolving thing. So he decides to shift gears to basically create the fountain of youth,
the elixir of
the elixir
life.
of life. You know, bit of a change. Like,
It
oh,
is.
I can't cure all disease, so I'm just going to
I'm
live
gonna make
forever
myself
instead.
immortal. Yeah.
And he starts testing it on
Flies.
Particularly the type of fly that only lives for like a day.
Yes.
I can't remember what they're called. He finds that female hormones are kind of what can trigger longer life. Like, women tend to age a bit more gracefully than men do. Their skin stays smoother, smoother for longer. So he thinks that was the trick. And he realised that the experiment did, well, after he first takes it, that the fly had actually changed sex.
Yes.
Afterwards. So when he takes it, it does bring out this new persona, and he fully becomes a woman.
Yes. A very sexy one as well.
And to be fair, there's a great picture of them stood side by side, which is ironic because there's no scenes. I'll put it up. There's no scenes where they would have been together in the room, bar like maybe one.
Yeah, of course. They don't have any scenes together.
Yeah.
Naturally.
But it has them stood side by side in the same outfit, and you could cast them as like siblings. Like,
well, it's something that the film takes advantage of in that sense.
Yeah, that is how because his neighbours, his nosy neighbours upstairs, who has it's like a mother and two grown-up kids.
Yeah.
One of which, the son, has a thing for Mrs. Hyde, and the daughter has a thing for Dr. Jekyll. She gets obsessed with him very quickly. And I do have to say, she's the most annoying part of this film.
Yeah.
She invites him to dinner, and he says, "Oh no, I'm busy." Then when she finds out there might have been another woman there, she's incredibly offended. Well, he did say he was busy. He's literally just met you.
So,
He did. I think in that moment, Dr. Jekyll did nothing wrong.
No, that's...
Apart from playing God in his laboratory.
Aside from that. But yeah, it's very true.
Aside from that small
thing. Like when Mrs. Hyde is seen in this, very enclosed flat that they all live in, he passes her off as his sister as an easy way to get out of it, because Susan, who is taking quite a liking to Dr. Jekyll, is very upset to hear that he's had a lady friend stay overnight at his house. So either not wanting to offend or not wanting to arouse suspicion, which is probably more likely, he says, "Oh, my sister, yeah, she's a widow, don't you know?"
Oh, you mean my sister?
Sister?
Yes.
Oh. I look forward to meeting her someday.
But, since you brought up Susan, let's just talk about Susan for a minute. It's interesting as well, because I really love this in Hammer. It's something that is so prevalent in Gothic fiction as well. Of the two very, very depictions of women. And it's, Mrs. Hyde obviously is like, develops from a male persona, but is obviously very overtly sexy and manipulative and confident, and she is it fully embraces everything there is about like her femininity and everything. Whereas on the opposite side of that, you have Susan, who is like the good little angel of the house type figure, who still lives with her mum, lives with her brother, ardently obsessed with Dr. Jekyll, and behaves like a child, essentially, when she doesn't quite understand why he's not returning her affection. She wants to invite him for dinner, and she does invite him for dinner, and then he doesn't show up. Oh no, sorry, that's it.
That's what I just said. He can't. He says, "Oh, I can't make it. I'm busy."
I can't make it. I'm busy. So she instantly rebuffs. The next day, she's like, "Well, I'm sorry you were too busy to dine with us last night."
It's soon after 11. But surely your friend could have told you that. I'm sorry you were too busy to dine with us last night, Dr. Jekyll. I didn't realize you had a prior engagement. My brother tells me she's very attractive.
Like I said, he did nothing wrong there.
Totally, yeah, it's unjustified. And then there's one time where he asks her what the time is because he's overslept. And she, he's passing her on the stairs, asks, what time is it? And it's like, it's just after 11, but surely your friend could have told you that. It's, Susan, you don't, as a girl, it's like you just want to take it to one side and be like, gotta, play it cool. Yeah. Susan, this is not great.
Grow up.
Well, she literally stalks him from outside her window as well. She watches his movements, watches when he goes out at night, and, watches what he's up to. She also can't take her brother teasing her, when he makes a little joke at her expense. Yeah. She's like a petulant child, and I also don't like Susan very much. But it is interesting when you pit, Susan and Mrs. Hyde, sort of against each other. When you have them existing in the same film, one serves to kind of emphasise the differences of the other. Hammer always does that very well, I think. Different sides of femininity.
I gotta talk about the transformation.
I think we have to.
Which, usually a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde transformation is usually something that they try to do quite viscerally and grotesquely. It's not something you can really do when you are transforming into Martin Beswick. And I think they do it really interesting. Obviously, digital effects were very long way off. And they did a lot of interesting in-camera stuff. And usually it'll be like a hand will go down, and then it's a woman's hand wearing the same ring coming up, and that's usually the start of the transformation, is a hand. The first time they transform, I had to rewind it a couple of times. I was looking at how they did it. So we have him like kind of like sweating, panicking, kind of turns away, so I was back towards the camera. The camera goes up to the mirror, and in the mirror we see Martine as Mrs. Hyde. Done that now. I think how they did it, because I watched it back to see if there was a hidden cut anywhere, but at no point does Ralph leave the frame or get fully covered to do a hidden cut. So I think that mirror was just glass and there's a hole in the wall, because when you start watching their movements, they don't quite match up, and I'm like, that's probably one of the few scenes where they actually were filming it together, and I'm like, that is so clever.
Yeah.
And they did lots of little shots like that
it's very cool
to have them change. And I was kind of floored by that. I'm like, oh, I'm in for a good time here.
It's very well done. And yeah, as you say, like comparing it to other transformation scenes, it's very simple, but just equally very brilliant. Because I guess in this context, you don't need the like any kind of gore, you don't need any kind of agony, because the sheer shock of seeing a woman in that mirror is like more than makes up for, the lack of any like overt body horror or something. And
the two personalities I get so different. The constant debate through the film, like, which one is the more dominant persona? And I always find it interesting that his neighbor, I can't remember his name.
Whose name? Sorry.
Neighbor.
Howard.
When Jekyll says no to his sister, he can say, oh, well, maybe he's just not interested in women. And then as soon as he sees Hyde, he's like, oh, never mind. It's that instant assumption that he must be gay.
Yes.
Because he said no to his sister. But that, when I watch the film, the way you can kind of look at it is like, is Mrs. Hyde his repressed sexuality? Because he keeps finding a reason to continue the experiment. There must be something he enjoys about doing it, especially when the heat's starting to build up on him. Because Burke and Hare have get caught very early on. One of them is lynched and one of them is blinded in like lime.
Yeah, lie, I think.
Yeah, so he has to kind of go back to killing. But he realizes they're looking for a man.
Yeah. So
it becomes Mrs. Hyde to start killing. Which you pointed out goes back to a theory that... There was a theory at the time that Jack the Ripper could have been a woman.
It's one of the weaker theories, admittedly, of Jack the Ripper, who famously, of course, we don't know who he was. But, a theory that has developed over the years, may have even existed at the time, is, well, what if Jack was actually a Jill? Because a lot of questions that people had about the Jack the Ripper victims was, why were these women trusting, this, to go off with this man? Which, first of all, is not fair. Also a lot of them were, well, most of all likely were prostitutes. So, like a man coming up to them, offering them business, like, what else are they going to do? It's yes, like, of course I'm going to go with you. But people have theorised that perhaps if it was a woman, it would explain if women were more likely to go off with another woman, that, element of comfortability and familiarity. There's nothing to suggest in terms of witness reports or anything that it was a woman. But I like that this film might be playing into that theory.
Playing into that theory. So there must be something he likes about that transformation. Let's be real, we can't talk about this film through a modern lens without talking about like the gender politics of it all, because it's interesting. It exists
in the book. I mean, Jekyll and Hyde is nothing if not, worthy of discussion around sexuality. I mean, the book, the novella was published in 1885 by Robert Louis Stevenson, and I think Hyde has always been viewed as something of an embodiment of Jekyll's repressed sexuality. Even when Hyde is the typical male persona, there's still that element that exists there. So it's rampant with this one. But yes, the film is definitely
prime for that type of discussion.
Yeah.
If you're viewing it through like 2024 eyes, like for a film made in the 70s, I think it's very, very...
It's bold.
Progressive, and it was reviewed well at the time. I asked you during watches, if this film came out today, would it be met with the same love? Is it seen as offensive to trans people? And would the people who don't like all that type of chat class the film as maybe woke and pushing an agenda? Whereas I think when it might have come out at a perfect time in the 70s where it was kind of just seen as a good film.
How inventive.
How inventive. They brought a film out. Because I was looking into reviews of this film, like modern day reviews of it. And there was an interesting one by, I think it was Dread Central. I can't remember the name of the author who was non-binary and approached it. It'd been on the list for a while and they watched it and kind of just fell in love with it and felt like the film spoke to them in a way that other movies just couldn't, and thought that the performances were incredible, especially the differences between, like, Ralph Bates is very, like, subdued, nervous Dr. Jekyll, but then you got the eccentric and sexual, confident Mrs. Hyde, and just really, really enjoyed it. And from that article, I popped onto another few that are referencing it, because there's some that kind of just look at it, kind of ignore the gender politics and just look at it as a film, especially reviews from the time. It led me to another review that was from another member of the LGBTQ muffled out that bit a little bit community, who really didn't like the film and thinks it's very transphobic. And their logic of that one is, when Jekyll is making serum, he needs female hormones. That's why he's killing women. And their point was, in this film, the only way that Jekyll can become a real woman is by stealing something from other women, and they class that as quite transphobic, and this is a film for TERFs. Personally, I think that I'm not qualified to really weigh in on this.
I can't remember what TERF stands for. Is it like aggressive feminists or something like
yeah,
that? Like,
I can't remember what it stands for off the top
women
of my head.
that are essentially anti-trans.
Yeah, so I'm obviously not the most qualified person to weigh in on this one. But when I was reading through it, I was like, I think you might. I don't think this is an accurate depiction of what the film is, especially looking at the era that it came out. And I think it's impossible to watch this film and not see how actually progressive it is.
I have a couple of points. So, one, my biggest takeaway from that, reading those two very different reviews, film is open to interpretation, and you can argue until the cows come home that I'm right. No, I'm right. Film is very personal. You take something away from it that someone else won't. You see something, you find a connection that other people won't, and that's fine. Like, that's the nature of film. The other thing I would say as well is, I don't believe for a second that this film was in any way deliberately malicious or set out to undermine or belittle an LGBTQ plus community. I mean, you also have to remember that the term transgender simply did not really exist in 1971. And for my personal takeaway, I think this film is progressive, but I think primarily, I don't even think that was an agenda for them. I think they were just trying to do something inventive with a very old gothic horror. Yes, we could do another version of Jekyll and Hyde, but what if Hyde was a woman? That's the primary motive behind the. Maybe they just wanted to pull the script.
Like you were saying with the original novella, it was kind of like about homosexuality being outlawed at the time.
Yes, in did I say that the book came out in 1885? Yeah. You might have to fact check me on that, but I know that in 1885. Oh, sorry, novella came out in 1886. The Labouchere Amendment came into effect the year prior, 1885, which outlawed acts of gross indecency between men. So I just wanted to bring that up for relevancy, because I guess when Robert Louis Stevenson was writing his book, that would have been, like a big thing that people were talking about, very likely at the time, that it was essentially now outlawed to be gay in public. It was dangerous for men to be seen to be, giving each other any kind of intimacy or, committing any kind of sexual acts at all. So it may have even just subconsciously, gone into the novella at some point. We don't know. But
I do see a lot of that making its way into Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde.
Yes.
Because you could also just look at this film as Dr. Jekyll's repressed sexuality.
Absolutely.
Because he's so involved in his work, outside of killing women, he has zero interest in spending time with them.
Yes. Doesn't give a shit about Susan.
Yeah, I mean, at one point, I think, probably give himself more of an alibi. He does agree to go to a show with her.
Yes, it doesn't show up.
It doesn't go because by this point he's starting to transform without the serum, against his will. And then it's even more debate. Well, like I said before, which side is more dominant? Which one is his true self?
Yet all the time I became more and more aware of her growing dominance within me. A dominance I no longer had the strength to fight, contain, or control.
Usually Dr. Jekyll adaptations are always about like the beast within, the beast within men. Hyde is usually a much more violent persona.
Yes. This
one, it definitely feels more like a bit of repressed sexuality.
I agree with you. And for me, if the question is who is the more dominant personality, is it Jekyll or is it Hyde? There's no question it's Mrs. Hyde.
Yeah.
The second he transforms into her, she is beguiled by herself. Like the way she looks at herself in the mirror, the way she flicks her hair and she, opens up the dressing gown and she's touching herself very provocatively. This is a person that likes what they see.
Yeah.
And where
it's
Jekyll...
It's very, just happy to be a woman.
Exactly. And where Jekyll is, potentially asexual, showing no interest in Susan. I don't know, maybe Susan just isn't his type. Maybe he prefers blondes. Who knows? I don't know. But where he shows no interest whatsoever, he's just locked in on his science. Mrs. Hyde instantly puts the moves on Howard.
Yeah.
Instantly. And I think that there is a worthy question there of how much of Mrs. Hyde flirting with Howard is Mrs. Hyde versus how much of that is Jekyll.
Because there is also that moment where, at one point, Jekyll rubs his hand along Howard's face and then realises what he's doing. And it's like, is that something that's always there? Which
is also potentially the most affectionate we ever see Dr. Jekyll.
Yeah.
And it's given to another man.
It's one of those films that you could have a round table with a bunch of different people on there, all going to have different opinions of how to interpret these scenes. That's what I think makes this film so interesting. I've watched this film twice now and picked up on different things.
Yeah.
And researching different people's opinions on it, especially from a modern perspective, has been really, really interesting.
It is fascinating. And, I obviously, your own personal experience will affect how you watch a film and how you interpret it. And that's, as I say, that's absolutely fine. But this film obviously is very interesting to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But I think also it is just a very ingenious way to inject life into, an old Gothic story.
Yeah.
Primarily. I mean, there's been so many Jekyll and Hyde adaptations. Interestingly as well, throughout time, Jekyll and Hyde, the stories always caused, a little bit of... not outcry, necessarily, but it's always been around at very interesting times in history.
Yeah.
Because when it was put on stage, the first theatrical run of Jekyll and Hyde, it coincided with the Ripper murders at the time in London. And there was on stage a sort of physical transformation. And at the time I always used to think it was Jekyll turning into Hyde, and I think it's actually the other way. It's Hyde reverting back into Jekyll. But audiences didn't understand how it was done. And it was just very simple, with physical acting and lighting, melting the makeup and stuff on the actor. But at the time, people lost their shit. And people genuinely might have thought that there was a connection between Jack the Ripper and Jekyll and Hyde as well. There's some kind of physical trickery going on here.
I didn't know that. So that having it be part of this film as well could even be a throwback to that. That is... ooh, that's cool.
It's interesting, right?
Yeah.
Jekyll and Hyde is just always... Yeah, so there is a genuine connection between it and Jack the Ripper.
Well, even looking at, Dr. Jekyll and Hyde and gender politics, when the Eddie Izzard version came out, they obviously made news because they cast Eddie Izzard, who is trans, in the role of Dr. Jekyll and Hyde.
Yes.
Which obviously got headlines going. A lot of the stories have a lot in common, but also very much associated with the time that they came out and what was going on publicly.
Yeah, for sure. I remember you telling me as well in one of the reviews that there was a bit of upset that Jekyll, when he turns into Hyde, that they were a bit upset that the trans character was ultimately a killer. It was
that's the same review I first met.
Suggesting it was falling into this trope of trans characters are bad people. But the way I sort of see that is, again, just going back to this very simple premise, is that the inner monster, Mrs. Hyde, is just the more powerful personality.
But also Jekyll was a killer before Mrs. Hyde.
Exactly.
So it's is that just part of the personality that's crossed over?
Yes. Yeah. I don't think you can fully disconnect the two.
No.
You can't. And even, you know, like when Mrs. Hyde is in sort of full swing, there are essences of Jekyll. She can't always fight him off.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
When Susan doesn't want to tell her family that Dr. Jekyll stood her up, so she just goes for a wander through the streets, even though it's known that there is a killer around.
Yes.
Again, she's dumb. Hyde goes to kill her. And I do find it very interesting, the first woman that we see Hyde kill, she stabs her in the back.
Yeah.
You know, it's like women turning on women. Dr. Jekyll seems to do it like face to face, whereas it's like, you know, women stabbing a woman in the back. There's something symbolic and kind of really mean about that.
Yeah, exactly.
And when Hyde goes to kill Susan, that is when Jekyll takes over.
Yeah.
And he says, like, in his voice, like, I've won that battle, but I do not think I'll ultimately win the war. Maybe kind of coming to the realization that if he doesn't, that maybe Hyde is the more dominant persona and who he's really meant to be.
I also like in that moment when he can't quite kill Susan, you start seeing Jekyll's hand come back, you know, like the hairy male hand, and it's very much implied that that in, you know, like the lady Mrs. Hyde costume, that he would have transformed back into Jekyll. So Dr. Jekyll, dressed as a lady, would have had to just run back.
That's right, it was very foggy.
The
foggy atmosphere. So, but interestingly, Ralph Bates, after the film came out, said that they should have pushed it further, and he was fully willing to do the Mrs. Hyde role in full drag.
I think I would have liked to have seen at least a scene
of him in the outfit after the transformation.
But I wouldn't like to have overruled Martine as a character.
She's a great actress.
Yeah.
She's stunning. Like,
she's scary as hell.
And scary. I also want to say, like, she has some of the most powerful cheekbones.
Yes.
Ever. And I think facially, her and Ralph Bates do look quite similar. And I think that's why it really works from a casting standpoint. But
totally.
The two of them, and apparently, I think they got along quite well.
They did get along very well. It's, you know, it's interesting that, you know, you're two main characters in this film that don't have any interaction together. But yeah, they did have a lot of fun when they were on set. And I always love hearing stories about that.
Was it Martine that said she thinks part of the reason that Hammer went downhill?
Oh,
I'll let you go ahead then.
No, you carry on.
She believes that it was Hammer leading into more like nudity.
Yeah.
Something that they'd only ever hinted at in the past. Might have been part of their eventual downfall and loss of their identity.
She has very strong opinions on it, yeah. I mean, I think it ties into maybe Martine was asked to do a full frontal nude scene in this film, which she was not happy about. I think she did it anyway.
They managed to get it to just breasts and buttocks.
Breast and bum, but she didn't want pubes on display.
No, she didn't.
Fair enough.
She said they had a closed set, but very much had people from the rafters just kind of looking in.
So it was not a closed set.
It was not a closed set.
But yeah, Martine has spoken...
Not cool.
No, it's not
cool at all.
Not cool. She's spoken very candidly about how, even at the making of this film, which overall she did enjoy, that she could see Hammer kind of descending into this very crude, you know, overtly nude territory, overly sexualized.
I mean, there's literally a poster here just of breasts fully exposed.
Yeah.
And like, we're not crude, but there is a difference between like when Hammer started to expose stuff and beforehand.
I will say that the working documents for this, which I think are highlighted in this book, like the development notes. So also this movie was written by a guy called Brian Clements, who's, you know, just a legend in British screenwriting. He wrote the TV show The Avengers, which at this time was cancelled, so he had a lot of free time, which is why he went on to do this. But anyway, his working notes for this are just absolutely batshit insane. It's, you know, like a twist on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, where Dr. Jekyll, you know, a very manly man scientist, turns into a full-breasted woman. And it's like, why would you have to... Why use that as an adjective, Brian? Like, that's not necessary.
I like Ralph Bates, but he's not like the manliest of men.
No, also not. But, you know, like, again, even in the development notes, they're really underscoring this idea that Mrs. Hyde has to be sexy. You know, we want a good-looking woman in order to, you know, to play this role. But yeah, she has spoken that, you know, she thinks that it was Hammer's attempt to compete with other horrors that were emerging at the time.
Especially in America. And she thinks it was the start of their downfall. She doesn't think they ever really recovered from it. Yeah.
So it's interesting. She may very well be right.
Good, like I said, it's a bit of a loss of their identity.
Yes.
There will be a different kind of victim tonight. Not a streetwalker. A fresh young virgin. And then the tug-of-war will be ended between us.
this is a fascinating twist on the Jekyll and Hyde story. And interestingly, just going back to, the theory of Jill the Ripper, and this film kind of capitalises on that. There are also many other theories out there that exist that, the real Jack the Ripper was killing these women, these 5 prostitutes, for specific body parts. That there was something that in particular from each of them that he really wanted. And that is also something that this film does as well. He's taking, taking their hormones.
Yeah. The police kind of work out that it has to be Jekyll because of how surgical it is. You then have, I can't remember if it's Burke or Hare who was still alive or blinded at this point.
It's Hare.
He knows obviously who it is because he saw him. He met with him, and he's telling the tale. He's using it to get her drinks, and the police kind of confront him about it. So the police descend on Jekyll's home, and I love this final sequence. Again, actually, weirdly does remind me of Curse of the Werewolf. The second time I get to mention that today, because it's across the rooftops.
Like the persecution as well.
Yeah,
the crowd watching.
Yeah, the crowd watching. But I love it. He's like running across like the edges of the roof. Police are following him. He gets stopped at one point because the window opens and the police are there. He jumps over onto another building. This is really cool. At one point, he's having to like scoot over, and that's when the transformation starts. And he's like, "No, not now! You'll kill us!"
Yeah.
Like if they transform in this moment, like they are just going to fall to their death.
No, you'll kill me!
And the transformation design is kind of done through fades through a stained glass window, and it looks so cool. And you can see like she knows if she takes over one more time, she has won.
Yeah.
And she will become the permanent personality.
Yeah.
But it's the worst possible moment.
To come through.
Falls, dies, and then we see that the face is like half and half.
Yeah, it's this weird physical fusion of
between the
two of them.
Between the two.
Yeah.
Because in one of the reviews I read that said that like there are many people that struggle with their gender identity, and and some never do work it out in their lifetime. And Jekyll and Hyde are kind of like that. They kind of die before really working out with who they are, coming to terms with who they are,
the true self,
the true self. Whether or not it was one or the other, or a mixture of the both, they'll never know because they died before they had a chance to.
Ends in tragedy.
And if they had survived, I'm pretty sure Jekyll wasn't going to have a good life after that.
I agree. Jekyll was always destined to lose the war.
Yeah, and he's always interested as a scientist. Like he is doing horrific things, so we can't see him as anything other than a villain, really. But he doesn't see himself as a villain, which always makes villains interesting.
Yeah,
villains.
In the name of science.
In the name of how many times did I say villains in that sense? Yeah, in the name of science. So he genuinely believes he is, because his end goal is ultimately good and worthy.
It's fine.
That makes him a good person.
It's fine sacrificing a few prostitutes.
Yeah.
Who's going to miss them, right?
Exactly. It's like, but Jekyll, in this, you are Jack the Ripper. You are
literally.
You are a notorious killer
of women.
And that it's kind of profound then that when he does take his formula and he changes, that he himself becomes a woman, which you think would then make him more sympathetic towards women, but somehow makes him more violent. So almost like fighting his urges.
Yes.
Fighting his other self. Again,
Quite
million different ways you can look at this film, and I am in no way a qualified person to really comment on it.
We're just film fans.
So I'm just watching it as a film, and I really enjoy this film, and I will upgrade this from DVD to Blu-ray. I think.
Yes, definitely. I will also just say, in terms of characters, we have Professor Robertson, who's Jekyll's
there's other people in this film.
I just wanted to bring him up in the sense that he is Jekyll's best friend. I think he's a fellow scientist as well. But again, before we were talking about the different portrayals of femininity with Martine and Susan, who's played by Susan Broderick. Easy. Yeah, different portrayals of femininity. With Jekyll and Robertson, you can argue it's very much the same, whereas Jekyll is, potentially asexual and not really interested in pursuing anything even remotely, sexual at all with either sex. You've got Professor Robertson, who can't get enough of women, who's very overly sexualized.
And even agree, basically says to Jekyll, like, you need to make time. Well, some good advice. You need to make time for yourself.
Yeah. For
starters, that you can't just work. But it's basically saying that you need to go out and get laid.
That is what he is saying. Yeah. Like, you need to step away from your laboratory, just
Go
for
spend
a
some
night.
time in the real
Have
world.
some fun. That's it's what.
Which, to be fair, isn't the worst bit of advice. Like, it probably would have done Jekyll some good to spend some time with real people.
Well,
When he's not killing them.
Jekyll misinterpreted the.
He misinterpreted it, yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Again, different interpretations that exist between the different genders, and I think the film does a good job of kind of underlining those differences.
Yeah. And it wraps it up in a very entertaining package as well. Like I said, the film itself is just good from beginning to end. Production quality is really good. I love the foggy streets
Yes.
that they go through,
God,
which really helps when trying to, like, you don't know who Jack the Ripper is because they've not been able to see because of this fog.
Yeah. It's
Helps keep the mystery.
it's delicious. Like if you love anything gothic, then this film is just a treat. Honestly, it's really, really well done, and it is considered one of Hammer's best. I think certainly of the decade, anyway. But even now, I think it is looked back on
Very fondly.
very fondly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember being somewhat disappointed when we went to see Dr. Jekyll. The most recent
Yeah,
Hammer
yeah.
film, because when they cast Eddie, I remember thinking, oh my god, are they doing a Dr. Jekyll Sister Hyde thing? I wanted to see that again, and I was a bit disappointed that
I
they
realize,
didn't go down that route.
in hindsight, because I remember me thinking as well, I could be quite sad, but it'd probably be unfair to cast a trans actor and say, oh, can you swap between a male and female persona because you're... I think that would have been a bit unfair.
Maybe, yeah. It's inventive, and it is done very well. A lot of that is, with under the hand of Roy Ward Baker.
Yeah.
He's obviously, a very skilled director. But
It didn't Ralph Bates also meet his wife on this film?
oh yes, he did. I was trying to. So she plays one of the
Betsy.
victims,
Betsy, she's called.
Betsy, and I was trying to figure out which one is she, and I believe now she is the very first.
Very
kill.
first killer, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a small role that she had, but yeah, he met his wife
He met his wife.
while his character was murdering her.
Yes. How romantic.
That's... honestly, is there any better way to meet your wife? But yeah, do you have any more notes on this one?
No, I don't, but I really do love it, and I've seen it so many times. I'm still always entertained by it.
I feel like with some other films that we've talked about, we've not really talked too much about the actual film and the plot, because the subject around everything else with this film is so much more juicy to talk about, and so open to interpretation. There could be parts of our audience now that really agree with us. There could be some people that really disagree with us, and I'm generally interested in what your opinions of this movie are, especially through a modern lens. Like, have any of you seen this movie, and what do you think about it? Where does it rank in regards to Hammer movies for you? As I know, our last Hammer one, we basically said Quatermass, is it Hammer's best film? I do still think it is in regards to quality, everything. This is very, very close. This is top few at least. It's up there.
Wow.
It's really is a good time.
It is a good time. Yeah.
Yeah, and turns out I just really like Roy Wood Baker's films, apart from Seven Golden Vampires.
Yeah, well,
But I don't think that was entirely his fault. He wasn't expecting to turn up somewhere with a crew with no studios and a crew that doesn't speak English.
And there he is. There's Roy. There he is, Roy. With his two leads.
Yeah. Okay, look at this image here.
Yeah.
They look so similar. It was just spot on. We even have similar chins.
Yeah, I know. Well, I think she was the first and only choice for the role.
Fantastic casting. Whoever cast both of them, well done. Not that you're watching this video.
Probably still even alive at this point, but you know, well done.
Well done. Maybe next time we'll do Curse of the Werewolf. We'll find out.
Yeah.
But yeah, also want to thank our channel members. You guys are awesome.
You know who you are.
You guys know who you are. Thank you so much for supporting us and basically just helping us do this silly little show that we do every other week now.
Yeah.
We enjoy it, and we hope you guys enjoy it as well. And for the rest of you, we'll see you when we see you.
Bye.